By the time the leaves in Seattle turned from burnt orange to brittle brown, Linda Evans had already finalized the Thanksgiving guest list twice. She stood at the head of her polished mahogany dining table, notepad in hand, rereading her menu under the warm light of a vintage chandelier that once belonged to her mother. Turkey brand, cranberry sauce, homemade, no shortcuts. Stuffing, rosemary and sage, Amelia's favorite. 23 years. That's how long she had orchestrated Thanksgiving at Cedar Ridge Lodge, nestled high in the Colorado mountains like a secret kept between family and snowfall. It had become more than a holiday. It was her symphony. Every ribbon-wrapped place card, every tapered candle carefully aligned with the cutlery, every bed turned down in advance of the family's arrival, Linda poured herself into it all. It was how she showed love. Not loudly, not through hugs or warm confessions, but through precision, through perfection. Her husband Henry used to say, "You can tell how much Linda cares by how tightly she folds a napkin." And it was true. At Cedar Ridge, everything stayed the same year after year. The same cabin, the same view of the snow-blanketed pines, the same morning hike on Thanksgiving Day followed by cocoa and stories by the fire. And of course, Charlotte would arrive late, with paint on her sleeves or a wild new idea about how art should disrupt convention. Linda never said it aloud, but she worried Charlotte saw tradition as a prison. What her daughter couldn't understand, was that tradition was the only thing that held Linda together after her own mother died. She still remembered the Thanksgiving of 1979. Linda was barely 15, clinging to her mother's apron strings as if she could stop time. Her mother, a woman of quiet elegance and fierce conviction, taught her that gratitude was a posture, not just a holiday. That year, her mother didn't make it to Thanksgiving. Cancer stole her in October. And yet Linda, grieving, fragile, and afraid, insisted on hosting dinner anyway. She made the cranberry sauce herself for the first time. Burned the first batch. Burned the second. On the third, she got it right. And when her father sat down at the table and wept into his mashed potatoes, Linda realized that ritual was how you survived grief. You didn't have to talk about it. You just had to keep the table set. The memory came back to her now as she placed freshly ironed linens into the cedar trunk by the front door, ready for their annual trip to Colorado. Only this year, the trunk would stay closed. Because Charlotte had canceled the reservation. Without a warning. Without a conversation. Just a phone call to the resort, a deletion of 20 years of ritual. Linda found out not from her daughter, but from a courtesy call from the manager. "Mrs. Evans," he'd said awkwardly, "your daughter called to remove the family's name from the standing Thanksgiving booking." Are you sure this is correct?" Linda's hands had gone cold. She didn't cry. Instead, she wrote Charlotte a message she would later regret. "You're not welcome here anymore." But the words had already gone out into the air like smoke from a fire you didn't mean to light. Now, with no lodge, no feast, no family gathering to prepare, Linda stood in her quiet kitchen surrounded by silence. The fridge hummed. The clock ticked. And for the first time in 2 decades, Thanksgiving wasn't coming. At least not the one she knew. She reached for the photo album. It was dusty. Heavier than she remembered. On the cover, a pressed maple leaf, laminated in plastic, one of the first leaves Charlotte had ever collected during a Thanksgiving hike when she was 9. Inside, Charlotte at 10, sitting on the hearth wrapped in a wool blanket. Charlotte at 16, faking a smile with cranberry sauce on her nose. Charlotte at 25, standing beside her easel, proud of her first gallery exhibition, while Linda pretended to be proud too. She wasn't cruel, but she hadn't understood her. And now, she wondered if the distance between them had always been her fault. Not for loving her daughter too little, but for loving her in the wrong way. The following Sunday, Linda received a message from her youngest, Amelia. "Can I come over?" Linda made tea. Waited. Braced herself. When Amelia walked in, she looked thinner than usual. "Quiet. She didn't cancel to hurt you," Amelia said softly, sitting across from her. She canceled because she was tired of being treated like a disappointment. Linda's breath caught. You never said it." But she felt it. Silence hung between them. Amelia reached for the photo album. "She kept that leaf," she said, flipping to the cover. I always wondered why. Linda looked down at it, brown edges curled, veins still faintly visible. She gave it to me the year your grandmother died, Linda said. She found it on our hike and said, Look, Mama. It's still beautiful, even when it's brown. She paused. I think I needed to hear that more than I realized. That night, Linda wrote a letter. Not an email. Not a text. A real letter. On cream-colored stationery with her mother's embossed initials. Dear Charlotte, I've made a mistake. Not just recently, but for years. I thought by giving you tradition, I was giving you stability. But maybe what I gave you was a cage. I never learned how to say, I'm proud of you, unless it came with a condition. I'm sorry for that. The cranberry sauce doesn't taste the same without you. The folded napkins feel hollow. I was so hurt when you canceled the reservation. Not because of the reservation itself, but because it made me realize how far apart we've grown. You are not the disappointment. I am the one who didn't see you clearly. If you'll have me, I'd love to come to your Thanksgiving, even if it's just takeout in mismatched bowls, even if there are no name cards or hiking trails. Because what I miss isn't Cedar Ridge. It's you. She mailed it the next morning, hands trembling slightly as she slid it into the mailbox. There was no immediate reply. But on Thanksgiving Day, as Linda sat in her kitchen alone, peeling an apple for a pie she didn't plan to serve, the doorbell rang. She opened it to find Charlotte, coat buttoned unevenly, a Tupperware of mashed potatoes in her hand. I figured we could start small, she said, voice unsure. Linda stepped aside. The house, which had once felt like a museum of expectations, warmed instantly. They ate in the breakfast nook, candles unlit, pie crust imperfect. And it was perfect. For the first time, there were no traditions, just two women learning how to be family without rules, without conditions. And Linda realized, maybe the most meaningful tradition wasn't the one passed down, but the one built from scratch, together. It was a Sunday. The kind Linda Evans had always cherished, soft light filtering through the kitchen window, the comforting simmer of beef stew on the stove, and a new set of linen napkins she had picked out for the upcoming Thanksgiving. She was polishing the silverware when Charlotte walked in. Not with a gentle knock or quiet entrance, but with a kind of energy that carried wind behind it. Mom, she said, her voice sharp with excitement, I'd like you to meet someone. Linda wiped her hands on her apron and turned around, already smiling out of habit. The smile froze. He was tall, his frame solid but kind-eyed. His hands looked worn from work, and his shoes, though clean, were scuffed. He extended a hand. Hi, Mrs. Evans. I'm Caleb Torres. There was a pause, small but enough to count. Linda shook his hand. Firefighter, is that right? She asked, as if confirming a rumor. Caleb smiled, calm and easy. Yes, ma'am. Been with the department for 8 years. Charlotte's eyes sparkled. She looked so proud. And that, somehow, hurt more than Linda expected. Later that night, after dinner, Linda stood at the kitchen sink, scrubbing dishes harder than necessary, listening to the laughter drifting in from the living room. She wanted to be happy for Charlotte. She really did. But this man, this firefighter, wasn't who she had envisioned for her daughter. He didn't go to the right school. Didn't move in the right circles. Didn't belong to the kind of family you could introduce to a country club without a whisper behind your back. Linda had spent her entire life building something. An identity, a reputation, a legacy of class and care. And here was Charlotte, poised to toss it all aside. That night, after Caleb had left, Charlotte lingered in the hallway. I know what you're thinking, she said. Linda didn't answer. She folded a dish towel into perfect thirds. He's a good man, the best I've ever met. He doesn't care about the labels or the pretense. He sees me, the real me. Linda turned slowly. And what is that supposed to mean? Charlotte hesitated. It means, I don't want to spend the rest of my life living up to someone else's version of perfect. The words stung not because they were cruel, but because they were true. I raised you better than that, Linda whispered. No, Mom, Charlotte said. You raised me to be polite, to be polished. You raised me to be afraid of what people might think. Caleb taught me to be brave. The next morning, Linda sat on the porch with her cup of tea, her hands trembling as they held the ceramic mug. She thought of her own mother. How hard she had worked to give Linda a life beyond struggle. How she used to whisper at night, "We don't have much, but we have grace. And that's enough." But Linda had always wanted more than grace. She wanted control, tradition, order, appearances. They made her feel safe. She had taught her children that the world would accept them if they played by the rules. But Charlotte had always been wild-hearted. She painted murals in college when others interned at banks. She wore red to funerals and spoke truth when silence was preferred. Linda had watched her with quiet worry for years. And now, Charlotte wasn't just making a different choice. She was dismantling the very foundation Linda had built. 3 days later, the family met for dinner. It was meant to be a simple announcement. Charlotte stood, fingers interlocked with Caleb's, her voice clear. "We're engaged." Linda felt the room tilt. The chandelier flickered slightly overhead. Henry coughed into his napkin. Nathan's jaw visibly tightened. Amelia blinked hard, as if trying to decide what face to wear. Linda didn't speak. Not during the toast. Not when the champagne glasses clinked. Not when Charlotte beamed at her across the table, waiting, hoping, for approval. Later, when everyone had left and Charlotte stayed behind to help clean up, Linda finally spoke. "Why him?" Charlotte didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Because when I'm with him, I'm not pretending," she said simply. "Because he listens. Because he doesn't care if my fork is on the wrong side of the plate, or if I've sold a painting this month. He just loves me." "And that's enough for you?" Linda asked. Charlotte's voice softened. "It's more than I've ever had." Linda waited for time to soften her heart. It didn't. It only made the ache sharper. The final blow came 1 week before Thanksgiving. Linda was in her bedroom, laying out the embroidered place cards she had ordered months in advance. The reservation at Cedar Ridge was confirmed. The head count was exact. Even the weather was forecasted to be perfect snowfall. Then her phone buzzed. A text from the resort. "Your daughter Charlotte Evans has canceled the permanent family reservation per her authorized role on the account. Please call if this is an error." Linda stood there, staring at the screen as if it were written in a language she couldn't understand. Canceled? How could she cancel Cedar Ridge? It was sacred. It was Thanksgiving. It was everything. She didn't call Charlotte. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She wrote one sentence. "You're not welcome here anymore." And sent it. Just like that. A bridge burned in 5 words. But later that night, alone in the den, Linda pulled out the box of Thanksgiving photos. One by one, she flipped through them. Charlotte as a toddler, holding a mini broom helping her clean. Charlotte at 12, proudly holding up a burnt pumpkin pie. Charlotte at 22, sitting quietly by the window after a fight, eyes red from tears, still wearing her place card necklace made of yarn. Linda closed the box. And for the first time in a long while, she wept. Not from anger, but from the sudden understanding that she hadn't lost control. She had lost her daughter's trust. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greater tragedy. The call came at 9:42 a.m. Linda Evans was in the pantry, organizing the second-tier spices, the ones she only brought out for Thanksgiving. Cloves, nutmeg, coriander. She had just found the small jar of allspice when the landline rang, its shrill tone cutting through the warmth of soft classical music drifting from the kitchen speakers. She wiped her hands on a monogrammed towel and answered. "Hello, this is Linda Evans." "Mrs. Evans," said a measured voice. "This is Benjamin Whitford, general manager at Cedar Ridge Lodge. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Of course not," she said automatically, already assuming he was calling about the welcome baskets she had requested for the grandchildren's rooms. "Is everything in order for next week?" There was a pause. "I wanted to confirm a cancellation." "I'm sorry. The permanent Thanksgiving reservation under the Evans family has been canceled, effective immediately. We received a call earlier this morning from Ms. Charlotte Evans, who is listed as a secondary authorized contact. She instructed us to terminate the standing annual booking." Linda's knees gave slightly. She leaned against the pantry door. I'm sorry, there must be a mistake." Charlotte wouldn't, she couldn't. This is our 23rd year. Yes, ma'am. Which is why I called to confirm. It was very clear. She stated explicitly that the reservation should be terminated permanently and that no future bookings are to be accepted under the Evans family name. There was a silence so deep it swallowed the sound of the music, the ticking of the kitchen clock, even the whisper of the autumn wind outside. Linda's lips parted, but no words came. Would you like me to reinstate the booking? He asked carefully. I still have the cabin held through end of day. Her hand gripped the phone tighter. No, she said. Then, after a pause, I'll be in touch. She hung up. The dial tone echoed like a scream into a canyon. Linda walked to the kitchen table and sat down. The spice jars were still lined up in front of her, hopeful little containers of memories and rituals. She stared at them as if they belonged to someone else. Cancelled. She whispered the word aloud. It didn't feel real. Charlotte had cancelled Cedar Ridge. 23 years. The first year, Nathan was still in braces. Amelia had lost her front tooth. Charlotte had drawn place cards in crayon, each with a tiny turkey wearing a pilgrim hat. She remembered that Thanksgiving like a cathedral in her memory, warm, reverent, untouchable. Henry had secured the permanent reservation through a business connection, called it a family heirloom in the form of a cabin. And every year, without fail, they returned. Even when Henry was hospitalized for a minor heart issue, Linda kept the tradition alive. She flew in early, decorated every room, ensured the table was set just as he liked it, one sprig of rosemary folded into the napkin ring. And now it was gone. Not by fire. Not by tragedy. But by choice. Her daughter's choice. She didn't cry. She cleaned. For hours. She wiped the countertops, repolished the cutlery, vacuumed the entry rug that had already been vacuumed the day before. Each motion was a protest. A denial. A desperate attempt to hold on to control. The phone buzzed again around 1:15 p.m. A message from Henry. Heading to golf with Richard. Need anything? She didn't respond. A second message appeared moments later. Talked to the resort. They confirmed Charlotte canceled. What the hell is going on? Her throat tightened. She put the phone face down. At 3 p.m., she called Charlotte. Straight to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. Instead, she walked out to the garden. The late November sun was soft and golden, stretching long shadows across the rows of dormant hydrangeas. She sat on the bench beside the birdbath and let her eyes close. Years ago, Charlotte had helped her plant tulip bulbs in that very soil. Linda remembered her kneeling in the dirt, laughing because she dropped an entire handful of bulbs upside down. They won't bloom unless they're right side up, Linda had said gently. Charlotte had rolled her eyes. Maybe they'll bloom their own way. She'd said it like a joke. But Linda could see now, maybe she meant it. That night, Linda didn't set the table. She didn't turn on the lights in the formal dining room. She sat at the kitchen island with a frozen lasagna and a glass of Chardonnay, flipping mindlessly through an old family photo album. Page after page. Thanksgivings past. Smiles frozen in time. Aging hairstyles. Seasonal sweaters. Each picture a frame in the film reel of a family Linda thought she knew. And there, in the center of it all, was the lodge. The backdrop of their legacy. Charlotte was in nearly every photo. Sometimes she looked joyful. Sometimes bored. Occasionally quietly sad. Linda had never noticed that before. She stared at one image, Charlotte about 15, holding a camera and looking slightly away from the group. Even then, her eyes seemed to say, I'm here, but I'm not part of this. At 10:17 p.m., a message came. From Charlotte. I know you're angry, but I had to do this. I couldn't pretend anymore. Just that. No apology. No explanation. No remorse. And yet, it hurt less than the silence. Linda didn't reply. She turned the page of the album, her fingers brushing the glossy paper like it might reveal a different truth. But the pictures told the same story. A mother trying to preserve. A daughter trying to escape. And in between, a table, beautiful, symmetrical, beloved. And now broken. She rose from the stool, walked slowly into the dining room and stared at the long walnut table she and Henry had purchased the year Charlotte was born. She imagined it again. Plates lined up, wine being poured, someone laughing too loudly at the wrong moment. And then she saw it. An empty chair. Not just missing. Vacant. And somehow, it was more unbearable than if the chair had been removed altogether. She sat in that chair, Charlotte's usual spot, ran her fingers over the grain, and whispered to no one. It was supposed to last forever. The call came on a Wednesday. Linda Evans remembered because she was ironing the monogrammed napkins, the ones she had custom-stitched the year Nathan brought home his fiancée. She had just finished pressing the last "eat" when the house phone rang. She considered letting it go to voicemail, but something in the sound, sharp and immediate, made her set the iron down and walk, slowly, toward the kitchen wall where the phone still hung, outdated but reliable. "Evans' residence," she answered, in her usual, polished cadence. "Mrs. Evans, this is Benjamin Whitford from Cedar Ridge Lodge." "Oh, but everything all right?" There was a beat of hesitation on the line. "I wanted to confirm something unexpected. Earlier this morning, we received a call from Charlotte Evans. She's listed as an authorized contact on your family's reservation file. She requested a full cancellation of the standing Thanksgiving booking. Permanently." Linda blinked. "I'm sorry." She was very clear, ma'am. No future reservations, no rollover, no deferment. She said your family would no longer be needing the cabin. There was silence. So complete, Linda could hear the faint hissing of the iron cooling on the board behind her. She gripped the edge of the marble counter. "There must be a misunderstanding," she said carefully, deliberately. "This is our permanent reservation. We've been attending for 23 years. Surely this is some kind of mistake." "I thought so too," Ben replied, voice gentle now. "That's why I'm calling." But Ms. Evans confirmed everything in writing via email as well. Linda could feel her heartbeat in her ears. "Thank you for the call," she managed. "Please hold the reservation until I speak with my daughter." "Of course, Mrs. Evans. But we do have a wait list. If we don't hear back in the next 48 hours. She didn't hear the rest. She hung up. She stood in the kitchen for a long time, hands braced against the counter, as if the whole house had started to tilt and she needed to steady it. By noon, she was sitting in the den, the house unnaturally quiet except for the soft ticking of the antique clock. The napkins were folded in a neat pile beside her, mocking her with their readiness. Thanksgiving was supposed to be next week. The turkey had already been ordered, the wine selected, the cinnamon sticks tied in bundles with twine. She had even picked up new slippers for the grandkids. Now it was all gone. With a phone call. A name scratched from a list. A reservation deleted like a forgotten email. But it wasn't just the lodge. It was everything the lodge had come to represent. Every photo in the hallway of the Evans family smiling on the snowy porch. Every seating chart. Every Thanksgiving toast, delivered by Henry like a corporate speech with just enough warmth to pass for paternal. And every year, despite the occasional silence or sideways glances, they had all come. Because it was tradition. Because it was family. And Linda had held it together with sheer will. With perfectly brown pies and polished silver. She had built that world with precision. And Charlotte, her daughter, her wild one, had struck it down with a single call. She called Charlotte at 1:10 p.m. No answer. She texted once. "Call me. Now." An hour passed. Nothing. So she called Henry. He picked up, annoyed. "Linda, I'm in the middle of a meeting." "Did you know?" she asked. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried weight. "Know what?" Charlotte canceled the reservation. There was a pause, then a sigh. "I just got off the phone with the resort myself. I thought maybe you'd done it." "Why would I cancel the one tradition that has held this family together?" He said nothing. Then, "I'll talk to her." Linda hung up. By 4, she had wandered upstairs. In the linen closet at the end of the hall was a box labeled Cedar Ridge Memories. Inside were laminated menus, old cabin maps, and handwritten notes from the grandkids. "Thank you for the pancakes, Nana." She pulled out one photo, Thanksgiving 2010. Charlotte, 20-something, hair tied back, wearing that awful purple sweater she refused to retire. She was smiling, sort of, holding a mug of cider. Her shoulders slightly turned away from the group. Even then, she was already pulling back. Already drifting. Linda had known. But she hadn't wanted to admit it. She thought if she kept setting the table, Charlotte would keep coming back. The day turned cold and wet. Rain smudged the edges of the windows. By nightfall, Linda was sitting at the kitchen table in her robe, a pot of untouched tea beside her. She finally opened her laptop and searched for the email. There was. Subject: Evans Family Thanksgiving Reservation. From Charlotte Evans. To Cedar Ridge Lodge. Dear Mr. Whitford, I am writing to confirm that I am canceling the permanent Thanksgiving reservation for the Evans family, effective immediately. This is not a mistake. This is a decision made with full awareness of its implications. Thank you for all your years of service. No salutation. No emotion. Just closure. Her phone buzzed at 9:23 p.m. A message from Charlotte. I know you're upset, but I couldn't keep doing it just because it looked good on paper. I need something real. I need peace. Linda read the words again and again. Peace? Was that what the lodge had failed to provide? Had her daughter really sat through 23 Thanksgivings and never felt safe? Never felt seen? All those years, Linda thought she was preserving legacy. But maybe she was preserving a mask. A fragile veneer of unity that couldn't survive one act of truth. She sat there until the tea was cold. The house completely still. And for the first time, Linda let herself feel the truth she had always kept tightly sealed behind guest lists and centerpieces. The family had been falling apart for years. And Charlotte had simply stopped pretending. The first night after the cancellation, Linda didn't sleep. Not really. She lay in bed beside Henry, who snored with predictable rhythm, while the ceiling above her seemed to breathe with shadows. Her phone buzzed once at 12:14 a.m., a message from Amelia. Mom, please don't say things you'll regret. Linda turned the phone face down on the nightstand. She had already sent them. The text. Precise. You've humiliated this family. I can't believe you would do this without speaking to me. You are not welcome at Thanksgiving. Each one sent in the burning aftermath of disbelief. She thought it would help. Thought that fury would be a balm. Something to wrap around the ache. But by morning, all she felt was empty. The house was still. Too still. No sound of rushing children. No thump of Henry's golf bag. Just the whisper of the dishwasher and the occasional hum of the refrigerator. Linda stood by the kitchen sink, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing a crack in the tile grout. It had been there for years. She'd always meant to fix it. But today it felt like a symbol. Something slowly splitting apart, quietly, constantly, until one day it was just broken. She made tea. The same blend her mother used to make on cold mornings. Strong black tea with orange peel and cloves. As it steeped, the scent filled the room, bringing with it a memory she hadn't summoned in decades. Charlotte, age 5, seated at the kitchen table in pink footy pajamas, drawing turkeys with her tiny fingers covered in marker ink. Mommy, mine has 5 feathers. She had run up and wrapped her arms around Linda's legs, giggling so hard she fell over. Back then the house was chaos. Sticky floors. Crayons in the couch cushions. Half-finished puzzles on every surface. But it had been real. Messy, but imperfect. Full of love. Somewhere along the way, Linda had traded all that in. 4 linen napkins. Perfect centerpieces. A schedule so tight it squeezed the joy out of spontaneity. Tradition became control. Control became protection. Protection became distance. And now, the distance had turned to silence. She walked into Charlotte's old room. Nothing had changed. It still smelled faintly of lavender and graphite. Sketchbooks lined the shelf. A tattered poster of a French art exhibit still pinned above the desk. She sat on the bed and picked up a sketchpad. Inside, charcoal drawings. Mostly landscapes. But on one page, a single unfinished portrait. A woman, older, shoulders pulled tight. Eyes heavy, jaw set. It was her. Linda could tell. Even in half-formed lines, she recognized the way Charlotte had seen her. But stern. Unyielding. She stared at the image for a long time. Not offended. Just exposed. Downstairs, Henry entered the kitchen mid-morning. He was still in his robe, reading emails on his tablet. "She still hasn't responded to me either," he said, pouring coffee. "I don't understand why she'd do something like this." Linda didn't answer, because for the first time, she thought she did. Later that day, she found herself in the garage, rummaging through old boxes. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. Something small. Something before. She found a taped-up shoebox labeled Charlotte Letters. Inside were folded pieces of notebook paper from grade school. Notes to Santa. Thank you letters for birthday gifts. A Mother's Day card drawn in marker, slanted and sweet. I love you more than cookies. And cookies are my favorite. Linda smiled, then bit her lip. Near the bottom, she found a note Charlotte must have written in high school. The handwriting was different. Taller. Messy. I wish I could tell you what I really want. But I know you just look disappointed. It wasn't signed. But it didn't have to be. Linda folded it slowly and held it against her chest. That night, while Henry watched the news, Linda slipped away to the dining room. She laid out the tablecloth she had planned to use for Thanksgiving. It was embroidered with gold thread and maple leaves. Imported from Italy. She'd never let anyone spill on it. Never used it more than twice. She smoothed it over the table, pressing down the corners. Then she sat. No plates. No centerpiece. Just her. And the ghost of every dinner she tried to make flawless. She thought about all the times Charlotte had looked uncomfortable. About the years they'd said so little while sitting so close. She thought about the time Charlotte brought home a painting she was proud of, bold, colorful, unsettling, and Linda had said, maybe something more neutral next time. She hadn't meant it to hurt. But now she realized. It all added up. Every small dismissal. Every redirected conversation. Every subtle silence. She had loved her daughter. Fiercely. But she had loved her conditionally. And now, she feared, Charlotte had finally stopped asking for approval. The next morning, Linda woke early. She brewed coffee. Made toast. Then she wrote. Not a text. Not a voicemail. But a letter. On cream paper with her neat, cursive handwriting, the kind Charlotte used to mimic as a child. Dear Charlotte, when I first got the call about the lodge, I felt like you had torn something sacred from our family. But I see now. I had mistaken ritual for love. And control for care. You were never the one who broke anything. You were simply honest. I'm sorry. For the words I sent in anger. For the years I asked you to be someone else. I remember you at 5 years old, giggling as you clung to my legs in the kitchen. That was love. And somehow, I let go of it too soon. If there's still room at your table, even if it's a folding chair, even if the napkins don't match, I'd love to sit beside you. Not as your judge, but as your mother. She sealed the envelope. No fanfare. Just a quiet walk to the mailbox, the cold morning air crisp on her skin. As she let the letter fall inside, she whispered, not to be heard, but to feel it leave her lips. I miss you, Charlotte. And just like that, the silence inside her didn't feel so heavy anymore. Linda Evans had never been late to a family meeting. She was the kind of woman who arrived early, who checked the napkin fold twice, who kept backup earrings in her glove compartment, just in case. But this time, she lingered outside the hotel lobby, pretending to read a magazine she wasn't holding right side up. The Four Seasons in downtown Seattle had always been a place of celebration for the Evans family, engagement parties, retirement brunches, anniversary dinners with speeches that ended in polished laughter and champagne toasts. But today, it was where they'd face the unraveling. Not in whispers, not behind polite smiles, but face to face. She finally walked in. Amelia was already seated. Nathan too. Henry stood stiff by the window, sipping coffee that had likely gone cold. And Charlotte? Charlotte sat at the far end of the conference table, next to Caleb, her back straight, her eyes guarded. Linda tried to meet them, but Charlotte looked away. A knife might have hurt less. The room was quiet until Benjamin Whitford, the manager from Cedar Ridge Lodge, cleared his throat gently. "Thank you for agreeing to this conversation," he said, folding his hands. "I'm not here to arbitrate, only to support a resolution if one can be found." Linda wanted to speak first. She always did. But instead, she waited. And for once, it was Amelia who filled the silence. Her voice was soft but steady. "We need to stop pretending." All heads turned. Even Charlotte's. Amelia rarely interrupted, rarely stepped outside the lines. But now she did. "This family has spent years looking perfect on the outside and crumbling in silence on the inside," she said, glancing toward their father. The reservation at Cedar Ridge wasn't just about tradition. It was about control. About image. About keeping up the story. Henry shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "I thought it was about family," he muttered. Charlotte let out a quiet, tired laugh. "No, it was about performance." Linda winced. But she didn't interrupt. Not this time. Amelia looked directly at her mother. "Mom, I know you think Charlotte betrayed you. But she wasn't trying to hurt you. She was trying to breathe. And honestly," she hesitated, then continued, "she's not the only one." Linda felt the words sink in like stones dropped in a still pond. This wasn't just about Charlotte. This was about all of them. About Amelia staying quiet too long. About Nathan following their father's footsteps because no other path seemed safe. About Linda herself, holding so tightly to an ideal that she missed what was real. Charlotte finally spoke. Her voice didn't shake, but her hands did. "I loved those Thanksgivings when I was little," she said. "I really did. I loved the snow, the matching pajamas, the cookies in Grandma's tin. But somewhere along the line, it stopped being about us." She looked at Linda. "It became a stage. And if you didn't know your lines, you weren't welcome." Linda opened her mouth to respond, but stopped. She'd been rehearsing. Linda Evans had never been to the Wild Bean. It was the kind of cafe with chalkboard menus, art that changed monthly, and mismatched mugs that felt intentionally rebellious. There were too many ferns and too few tablecloths. The chairs didn't match, the music was too soft to identify, and the air smelled faintly of cardamom and sage. It wasn't her place. But it was Charlotte's. Linda had texted the night before, simply, "If you're free tomorrow, I'd like to meet." No agenda. Just coffee. For a while, she thought Charlotte might not reply. But 3 dots appeared. Tanim. The Wild Bean. And here she was. Sitting in a chair that wobbled ever so slightly, holding a cappuccino topped with a foam leaf that reminded her of autumns gone by, before things had cracked, before the phone call, before the words that couldn't be taken back. Charlotte arrived 5 minutes late. She looked different, older, maybe, softer. Or perhaps Linda was just seeing her clearly for the first time in years. No foundation. Simple sweater. Hair loosely pulled back. But she was glowing in a way Linda couldn't explain. Or maybe couldn't ignore. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, sweetheart." They both sat. A silence followed, not heavy, but fragile, like porcelain unwrapped from old tissue paper. Linda took a breath and said something she hadn't said in a very, very long time. "I'm here to listen." Charlotte blinked, then smiled gently. Not bitter, not cold, just surprised. "I didn't think you'd say that." "I didn't think I would either." The truth made them both laugh. Linda wrapped her hands around the warm mug and stared at the steam. "I used to think being a good mother meant preparing you for the world by shielding you from it, teaching you the right way to live." Charlotte's voice was soft. "I know. I felt it every holiday." Linda looked up. Their eyes met, clearer now, not clouded by old wounds or quiet expectations. "I realize now," Linda said, "that I wasn't protecting you. I was just afraid. Afraid you wouldn't be safe if you lived outside the lines." "And I was afraid," Charlotte said, "that if I colored outside those lines, you'd stop loving me." Linda's breath caught. That wasn't just a sentence. It was a wound laid bare. She reached out, not to fix, not to control, just to hold her daughter's hand. "I never stopped. I just didn't know how to show it in your language." Charlotte squeezed gently. "Maybe this is a start." That afternoon, Linda drove home in silence. But it wasn't the kind she feared. It was the kind that holds room for change. She pulled into the driveway and sat with the engine off, looking at her house. A house that had once been spotless, symmetrical, composed. A museum of status. Now it looked different. Still elegant, but a little softer. Like maybe, she thought, it could learn to breathe again. She started small. She called Amelia, not to give advice, but to ask how her week had been. She complimented Charlotte's artwork on Instagram. She even sent Caleb a thank you text after he repaired a neighbor's broken fence. And every time she resisted the urge to offer an opinion or correction, it felt like lifting a weight she didn't realize she was carrying. One Sunday, Charlotte invited her over. Not for a formal dinner. Not for a planned event. Just a quiet afternoon. When Linda arrived, the house smelled of rosemary and something sweet. A record played softly in the background, Fleetwood Mac, maybe? The kind of music Linda once dismissed as a little too unpolished. Charlotte led her to the kitchen. "I made lemon bars," she said. "Your favorite." Linda blinked. "You remembered." "I always remember." They sat at the kitchen island, elbows brushing slightly. There was no monogrammed napkin. No silver serving platter. Just 2 plates, 2 forks, and sunlight coming through the window. And it was perfect. Later, they went for a walk around the block. No topic was off limits. No need to perform. Charlotte spoke of her art, of upcoming shows, of how Caleb had learned to cook Puerto Rican rice from his grandmother. And Linda listened. Not to respond. Not to redirect. Just to hear. And in that quiet, steady rhythm of words and footsteps, she realized. This was motherhood. Not the glittering dinner parties. Not the curated photos or annual traditions tied up in ribbons. But this. Proximity without pressure. Love without condition. That night, Linda wrote in her journal. She hadn't done that in years. She wrote about what Charlotte's laughter sounded like now, free, unforced. She wrote about the way lemon bars tasted better when served with joy instead of performance. She wrote, "I thought I wanted a perfect family. What I really needed was a family that could tell the truth." A week later, Charlotte came by unannounced. She carried a large sketchpad under her arm. "I made something," she said. "I wasn't sure I'd ever show you. I think you're ready." They sat on the living room floor, Linda in her soft slippers, Charlotte cross-legged like she was still 10. Charlotte opened the pad. Inside was a portrait. It was Linda, but not the way she looked in photos. Not polished. Not posed. This Linda had laugh lines and tired eyes, but a warmth in the shoulders, a softness in the jaw. She looked like someone real. Linda's throat tightened. "She looks like someone who's learning," she whispered. Charlotte smiled. "She is." That night, as Linda set the table for a casual dinner, just grilled salmon and salad, no centerpiece, she placed mismatched dishes without flinching. Charlotte and Caleb were due any minute. No place cards. No candles. Just room. And for the first time in her life, Linda understood what her mother meant when she once said, "You don't build family with rules. You build it with room to grow." She smiled. And let the door stay open. It was the day before Thanksgiving when Linda Evans pulled the well-worn recipe card from the back of her kitchen drawer. The handwriting was faded, her mother's script, delicate and deliberate, written in fountain pen ink now smudged in corners. Spiced pear pie, with orange zest and love. She hadn't made the pie in years. Not since Charlotte was a little girl and used to perch on the counter, legs swinging, cheeks dusted with flour. Back then, Charlotte had insisted on arranging the pear slices herself, meticulously placing them like flower petals, humming to herself, always going rogue with the cinnamon. Linda used to correct her. "Too much spice dulls the fruit," she'd say. But Charlotte never listened. And maybe that had been the problem all along. Now, standing in her perfectly organized kitchen, with its copper cookware, marble countertops, and culinary magazines lined up like soldiers, Linda reached for the mixing bowl, not to control the process, but to remember what it felt like to create something with her hands, not her expectations. She zested the orange slowly. She didn't measure the cinnamon this time. And when she placed the slices in the dish, she let them fall a little out of order. And it felt good. Like breathing. Henry walked in just as she was brushing egg wash over the crust. "You're really making that old pie?" he asked, eyebrows raised. She didn't turn around. Just nodded. "It was Charlotte's favorite," she said softly. He approached slowly, hands in pockets. "Are you sure about going tomorrow?" Linda looked up. "I'm not sure about anything," she said. "But I think it's time I show up for something that isn't about being right." Henry sighed, somewhere between hesitation and surrender. "Do I need to wear a tie?" She smiled. "God, I hope not." The next afternoon, as rain misted against the windshield, Linda sat in the passenger seat clutching the still warm pie in a covered basket lined with a checkered towel. Henry drove in silence, only the rhythmic swish of the wipers between them. As they turned onto Charlotte Street, modest, tree-lined, welcoming, Linda felt her chest tighten. She hadn't stepped into her daughter's home in almost a year. The last visit had ended with words flung like arrows, and Charlotte closing the door with her eyes full but dry. Now, the same door opened with a creak, and there she was, Charlotte, hair pulled into a loose bun, wearing slippers, a little flower on her cheek. She looked like home and boundary and bravery all at once. "Hi, Mom." Linda stepped forward slowly, holding the basket like a peace offering. "I brought the pie." Charlotte looked down at it and blinked once, hard. "You remembered." "Of course I did." They stood there for a beat. Then Charlotte stepped aside. "Come in. We just lit the candles." Inside, the house smelled of rosemary, citrus, and laughter. The living room was lit by strands of golden fairy lights and the warm glow of mismatched candles, some tall and elegant, others stubby and flickering. There were no place cards, no folded linen napkins, no catered appetizers or classical music, just voices, overlapping, honest, imperfect. Caleb was in the kitchen, carving the turkey with a grin and wearing an apron that read, "Grill Sergeant." Amelia was at the table arranging a haphazard centerpiece of eucalyptus and pine cones. Kids ran barefoot. A dog barked. Dishes clinked. Someone laughed so hard they snorted. And Linda stood still in the middle of it all. No one asked where the fine china was. No one cared about the polish on the silver. It was beautiful in a way that couldn't be staged. Charlotte guided her toward the dining table. "You can sit here, between me and Amelia." Linda paused. "No head of the table?" Charlotte smiled. "No head. No foot. Just room." As the food was passed around, stuffing, glazed carrots, tamales from Caleb's sister, and a bizarre but delicious cranberry jalapeno relish, Linda looked around and felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Relief. She wasn't being judged. She wasn't performing. She wasn't controlling. She was just part of it. When it came time for dessert, Linda stood up. Her voice wavered slightly. "You brought something." Everyone turned, forks in hand, expectant but casual. She lifted the checkered cloth, revealing the pie. The crust was uneven, a little over-browned at the edges. There was even a small tear on one side where the filling had bubbled over. But it was warm, and real, and hers. Charlotte covered her mouth. "Is that?" Linda nodded. "I didn't make it to impress anyone. I made it because I miss the little girl who used to tell me I was doing it wrong." Laughter, soft and knowing. She looked directly at Charlotte. "And I want to know the woman she became." Silence. Then applause, not grand, but heartfelt. Charlotte got up, walked over, and wrapped her arms around Linda with a fierceness that felt like years folding in on themselves. Linda closed her eyes. And for the first time in a long, long time, she let her daughter hold all of her. The proud parts, the broken parts, the part that had finally learned how to let go. Later that night, after the dishes were washed and the kids fell asleep under coats and throw blankets, Charlotte and Linda sat on the porch steps sipping tea from chipped mugs. The air smelled of cedar and pie crust and distant winter. "You did good today, Mom." Linda smiled at the stars. "I didn't bring cloth napkins. That's got to count for something." Charlotte laughed. "You brought yourself. That's what counted." Linda turned to her. I spent so long trying to give you a perfect life. I didn't need perfect, Charlotte said. I just needed you. They sat in silence for a while. No tension. No script. Just two women, two stories, one stitched heart slowly mending another. As they stood to say goodbye, Linda turned and asked, almost shyly, "May I come again next year?" Charlotte leaned in, kissed her cheek, and whispered, "Next year you bring the pie. I'll fold the napkins, crooked of course." Linda laughed. And for the first time, it wasn't the laugh of someone hiding. It was the laugh of someone finally free. The house was quiet again. Thanksgiving had passed. The leftovers had been stored, the pie dish returned empty, and the guest towels were back on their shelf. Linda Evans stood at the kitchen window with a cup of tea in her hands, the steam curling upward like a whisper. Outside, the last leaves clung to the maple in the backyard, their edges browned, but still glowing amber in the soft morning light. She wasn't rushing to plan anything. No centerpiece to perfect. No guest list to curate. No reputation to uphold. Just her. The quiet. And a memory still warm in her chest. She had almost lost them. Not to death. Not to distance. But to pride. She had thought for so long that what made a mother was presence, structure, and control. She had mistaken rules for love. Tradition for connection. Performance for protection. And when Charlotte canceled the reservation, it hadn't just broken a routine, it had cracked her identity. She thought she was angry because of the lost lodge, the embarrassment, the break in appearance. But that wasn't it. The truth had settled in slowly, like snow drifting against the window pane. She had been hurt not by rebellion, but by irrelevance. She hadn't been needed, or so she thought. There is a unique ache in realizing that the people you poured yourself into no longer look for you in the same way. It wasn't Charlotte's words that had bruised her. It was the silence, the uninvited conversations, the plans made without her, the fact that someone else now held her daughter's heart more tenderly than she had. She had watched it all from a distance, like a guest outside her own family's window. That was the pain. Not rejection, but displacement. But something shifted when she saw Charlotte open the door that day, holding that pie, wearing flour on her face, eyes softer than Linda remembered. Charlotte hadn't shut her out to punish her. She had done it to protect the piece of herself that refused to shrink any longer. Linda could see that now. Not because Charlotte had said it outright, but because for the first time in years, Linda had listened without waiting to speak. She had let go of the script. And in doing so, she finally heard the heartbeats behind the words. Motherhood, she realized, was never about being the center. It was about making room. For questions. For growth. For change. She thought about all the Thanksgivings they had spent at the lodge. How she had obsessed over napkin folds, menu pairings, which wine glasses to use. All that effort. All that perfection. But the one Thanksgiving where she truly felt close to Charlotte again? The plates didn't match. The pie was lopsided. The dog licked the mashed potatoes off someone's plate. And it was beautiful. Not because it was polished, but because it was honest. She walked into the dining room now, sunlight pouring over the table. It had been cleared of its holiday decor. No runner, no candles. Just wood. Grain. Texture. She ran her hand along it, remembering the meals it had hosted, the hands it had held. And she whispered aloud, like a prayer. I'd rather be invited to the floor than rule the table. Because the truth she'd discovered was simple, and it had taken her 60 years to learn it. Love doesn't look like legacy. It looks like letting someone be who they are, without trying to edit them. Later that week, Linda sat down with a blank note card. She wasn't one for journaling, but she wanted to write this down, not for anyone else to read, but for herself. She wrote, I used to think I was the keeper of our family's worth. Now I know, I am its witness. And that is enough. That night, as she and Henry sat on the couch, he looked up from his book and said, almost offhandedly, You've been different lately. Linda smiled. Different how? Lighter, he said. Less sharp around the edges. She thought about it. Maybe forgiveness didn't start with saying, I'm sorry. Maybe it started with surrender. With deciding to stay soft, even when everything in you wants to armor up. She would never again host Thanksgiving at Cedar Ridge Lodge. That chapter was closed. But now she understood that Charlotte hadn't ended a tradition. She had started a new one. One not built on exclusivity, but on inclusion. One not built on expectation, but on invitation. One not measured by how good the gravy was, but by how free the laughter rang. The next time Charlotte texted her, "Thinking of having a backyard dinner soon. Just some neighbors and friends. You and Dad should come." Linda didn't ask what to bring. Didn't ask what to wear. Didn't ask who else would be there. She just typed, "We'd love to," and meant it. Because sometimes, the most beautiful moment in a mother's life isn't seeing her child succeed. It's seeing her child at peace with who she is, at peace with her roots, and most of all, at peace with you. Reflection and life application. Bonus 150 words. Linda's story reminds us that love, real love, isn't proven through control or tradition, but through the ability to let go, to evolve, to listen, to show up even when we're uncertain. Whether you're a mother, a daughter, a sibling, or someone rebuilding broken bridges, remember, it's not about keeping things perfect. It's about keeping your heart open. Sometimes, our families won't follow the script we imagined. But if we allow ourselves to grow with them, we may just find something deeper than legacy, a connection that no tradition can contain.